So, hello, everybody. I'm Lisa Herrick. If you haven't met me before, welcome. I am talking to you from 31st Street in Washington, D.C., which is where I live, which is where we all started. And I heard today from Aaron that our membership has gotten up to about 1,700. So that's fantastic. We've been doing a membership drive all year, and I think we've added like 100 people. So that's really great because every time we add a member, we add their network. So it's exponential, which is fantastic. So today we will have a wonderful speaker, David Pepper. First, we're going to hear from Jim. We are going to hear just what's happening, what his research is telling him, what's coming up. Then we'll hear from David. We'll have a chance for some questions and answers. And we'll have a couple of people speaking very briefly about volunteering that we need. So stay tuned for some things that we really need. And if you can jump in, that would be great. One thing I just wanted to tell you all about is whether or not you came to the fundraiser for Pennsylvania recently, where Jalen Nix, one of the leaders of the Democratic Party there, spoke. He was wonderful. We really enjoyed hearing from him. He sent us an email today or yesterday saying that because of our donations and the donations of other people like us, it's not only us, but we raised a lot of money for Pennsylvania this month. That this week they are training their first wave of 8 field organizers for Philadelphia, and they are about to open 4 offices in Philadelphia in 2 weeks. That is because of funding they're getting from grassroots groups like 31st Street. He also mentioned that they had in January hired an organizing director who began early outreach and volunteer recruitment, and therefore they have been able to already knock 10,000 doors. So it's April, they're knocking 10,000 doors already, and that is because they have the money to hire people to recruit volunteers and to organize districts, neighborhoods, and begin long-range organization for November. And we hope, it will be ongoing. We hope they don't fold up their tent in December. We hope that they'll have organizers there ongoing, because that is the model that we support. So just want you to know your presence, your attendance, your participation, your dollars, it's actually incredibly effective. So as Aaron said in our orientation, when you are talking to somebody who is frustrated, discouraged, frightened, and they are sick of getting all those texts and emails from campaigns, and they don't know who to donate to, or whether to donate, please tell them about our group. Just please tell them there is a group where you can belong to people who are dedicated, who are making decisions based on research, and who are all about effective intervention to protect our democracy. And we welcome new members, and we are going to have a picnic. Almost forgot to say that. We're going to have another picnic. We have a picnic in the fall. We have a picnic in the spring. We're going to have a picnic in June. Look for information about the picnic in my newsletter. It's June 8th. You can save the date. And that is a time when we get together in one of our members' huge backyards in Chevy Chase. And it is wonderful to see people in person. And you can have a sense of being a group in person, in the flesh, as well as on Zoom. So anyway, I'm going to turn it over to Jim, and thank you so much for coming, and hope you can stay tuned for the whole hour.
Great. Thanks so much, Lisa. Great inspiration, great leadership. I'll be there on June 8th. I'll look forward to talking to people. So I'm the retired epidemiologist and political analyst, and as almost everybody knows, I need to show slides, so I'm just going to go ahead and do that. Let's begin with our recent fundraiser. How did we do for the state parties in Michigan and Pennsylvania? The goal was $250,000, and maybe a stretch, but turns out that we actually have raised now over $275,000 And the work is underway. So, I mean, that's the value of raising money early, is that they are actually doing the work. And again, I couldn't resist also having a slide of what Lisa just said. This is from Jalen Nix. And this is what our money specifically was for the main thing, was this Philadelphia activity, which is concentrating on the lowest turnout areas of Philadelphia, which has been a problem, and which they think that they have the ability to turn out much better for us to win that state. So I'm going to give you just a little bit of a sense of where I think things are kind of conceptually. And those of you who follow Simon Rosenberg will see that this is a lot of this is aligned with what he says. But before that, we have a situation where we have what I can call the haves in terms of funding, the marquee campaigns. And I'll show you more about that. And they're doing well, and that's fine. But there's another group that I'm calling the have-littles, or the have-nots. And these are the groups that I think where our support and our dollars will make a lot more difference: grassroots groups, state Democratic parties, and legislature and down ballot candidates. Of course, we think early money is absolutely crucial, and I think we've already seen that. Here's one other thing, though, which is that, and here's where I kind of agree with Simon in a certain way. I don't believe we can get to 55% of the vote, but I do think that it makes sense, while we're trying to elect Biden, and that's the most important thing, that we really want to also have a national trifecta with both the House and the Senate. So that's why we're supporting the Senate in creative ways. But also, we really want to make some inroads in the legislatures. And we have some real opportunities for that, so that we're not like teetering on the edge with every election. We need to kind of try to get beyond that. And we see a lot of need and opportunity, more than we can do, but we're reaching in order to do as much as we can. And so here are the things going for us, kind of like what Simon would be talking about. The polls have shifted a bit to us with respect to Biden, and that's a positive. The economy is strong, and it's going to, in my view, going to stay strong. But more importantly, politically, people are beginning to realize it a little more than they have in the past, including in their own lives. Trump looks small, and he looks kind of incoherent. Not that I follow things that he says that much, but he's, pretty incoherent, and that's going to hurt him. We're raising a lot more money than they are generally. Abortion is on the front burner, especially in Arizona, right? So that'll help us a lot, I think, in Arizona, but also in a lot of state referenda and things that are going on. That's going to help us a lot. The Biden campaign is really getting underway. And one of the things that they're doing better is that they are emphasizing a lot more field presence. I mean, still most of it's going to be, advertising, but, and it's not easy to build, field presence, but they're trying to do it, and they are doing, and that's going to help a lot. The Trump campaign, on the contrary, is kind of in disarray. And then lastly, there's the activated volunteer grassroots groups that, like us, that I think they're all over the country that are really helping out more so in the past. So here's what you probably won't hear so much from Simon Rosenberg. There are a lot of things that are working against us, unfortunately. To be honest, Biden is still not popular. He has a weaker support in our base than we've had, 4 years ago, in terms of younger people, people of color, men, young men, and so forth. I don't want to exaggerate that, but it actually is pretty clear. Maybe those people will come home and turn out, but that's part of our job. They have their Republican propaganda machine. And don't underestimate it. It's spewing out stuff about the invasion from the border and the crime is going up and all that sort of thing. Here's something people may not really know that much, but voter registration is ironically tilting more toward Republicans in a lot of places. That's one reason why it's an important priority for us. That's why, in terms of on the ground in Pennsylvania, that's our main activity right now. And we're going to hear a little bit more about that later from Linda. So we have this challenge in US Senate map. We have the third-party candidates. We have the fact that Trump's support is kind of unpredictable. We just don't know which of these people are going to turn out. The other thing, though, is that we also know that they don't play fair. The MAGA Republicans are kind of ruthless. And so we have to be alert to that. And that argues for doing more in voter protection. Okay, so good and bad. All right, and just a little bit on the haves. There's all kinds of data and all kinds of other kinds of, but this is very illustrative. Looking at the key US Senate races in across the country, and compared to the Republicans, and we're doing very, very well. And it's not just here; it's also in the PACs, the Democratic majority PAC, and so forth. In the House, very similar kind of things. Marquee candidates, federal candidates, funding directly, really in excellent shape. That's why we're going elsewhere for investment. Right. So here's our state map. Moderate priority is Pennsylvania. And we've been doing some of these states, and we don't want to overreach, but there's so much need there that, we're really, even though we just finished up a fundraiser, we're going to be proceeding right away to another one, another effort. And what do you suppose is going to be our approach this time? Well, we're going to be bringing in Wisconsin, because Wisconsin beckons. And the same electoral college sort of logic that we presented to you in terms of Pennsylvania and Michigan really applies to Wisconsin as well. You need 45 electoral votes. And that even if we win these two, we still have a gap of 16. And the way to make it up is not very good. Georgia, I think, is iffy. Even the second district race, electoral college vote in Nebraska, the Republicans are trying to change that, so we may not even have that. And so we need to win Wisconsin, and you could say that Wisconsin beckons us. Oh, the other thing, a point I made before is, if we just win by, a couple of electoral votes, college votes, yeah, that'll probably hold, but we'll have a real brouhaha fight on our hands. The more we can win these states and decisively, the better it's going to be. And so this is kind of, I don't want to call it a scorecard. So where the green checks are, that's what we've done already. So we had North Carolina and Montana grassroots groups, and just finished doing the Democratic parties in Pennsylvania and Michigan. But now we think there's really great opportunity next to be doing grassroots groups support. And of course, we'll be doing canvassing ourselves and voter registration in Pennsylvania, the red checks. Here's the other thing. It's not just about Biden. It's not just about the electoral college votes. Those two states have key races in all these major categories. And the major advantage of supporting grassroots groups is that you can support all these things at the same time. And also they have a long-term presence and so forth. So that's why we're shifting now for what's going to be our next fundraising effort to Wisconsin and Pennsylvania grassroots groups. And we know the polling is tight, and it's been tight in past years, the elections. So we call it our three-legged stool. We're trying to provide some balance to the great support the candidates are getting. All right, so just briefly to remind us, what is it that these C3 and C4 groups. C3, 501c3, which are the tax deductible groups, nonpartisan, and C4 groups that are not tax deductible, but can do a good deal of their work on a partisan basis. Well, I divided it up into these two different sort of categories. They have a kind of an ongoing, longer term set of activities, particularly voter registration, which is extremely important right now, but these other things as well. But then also, when we get closer, I should also say that the major comparative advantage to in addition to the other things I mentioned is that they have typically, to one degree or another, other activities that they do in the community that support the community. It could be food banks, it could be reading, it could be water quality, it could be hog farm pollution that they weigh into, and that gives them a lot of credibility for the when it comes this time, which is election time, when they're doing much more intensive voter outreach and other kinds of things to help us win these elections. Okay, so where is this taking us? So I want to introduce you to these organizations that we're planning to be supporting on a fundraiser set for May 15th. So in Pennsylvania, there's an organization we've supported in the past, Make the Road Pennsylvania, primarily Latino, which has both a C3 and a C4 element. I would describe them as kind of scrappy and working hard all year round, and a good balance of political and other kinds of activities. And importantly, they are positioned in the sort of northeastern, if you will, part of Pennsylvania, which has very key U.S. congressional districts, 7 and 8, which is Wild and Cartwright, and also some legislature races that they're supporting actively. Over in Wisconsin, we're supporting a C4 called Power to the Polls. I guess I got the wrong name down here. It's called Power to the Polls. And they're relatively new, headed up by Mandela Barnes. And what I really like about them is that they are focusing kind of similarly to what we're doing in Philadelphia. They're really focusing on ongoing outreach to low turnout neighborhoods, people of color in Milwaukee, Racine, Kenosha, those kind of places where we really need to get the turnout. And then there's a Native American group in Wisconsin, which is our C3, that does a great job working with the 11 federally recognized Indian tribes in Wisconsin. And we choose these organizations pretty carefully based on a lot of key informants, but also getting advice from what's called the donor table, which is a set of people in each state, which is kind of set up to help people figure out where to, they're a blue organization, where to provide support. And one of the nice things about Power to the Polls is it's headed up by Mandela Barnes, who's agreed to be our speaker. So we feel like we have done quite a good job fundraising, and we want to, even reach a bit more. We think because of the C3 component that we can even raise a bit more. So with your help, which has been so great for all these other efforts, we're putting our goal at $300,000 for this effort. And this isn't really a fundraising session, but we are going to put the fundraising links in the chat if people would like to support that. So here is going to be our speakers: Mandela Barnes on the 15th, mark your calendars, and Diana Robinson, who's just a fantastic leader and organizer for Make the Road. All right, so that's really all I've got to say about where things are and where we're heading. And I just want to now turn over the mic to David Pepper. As people know, we don't do long introductions, but I will just say that I'm a big fan of David Pepper. He's very astute, he's prescient, and he's a great thought leader for our movement and for us. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, David.
Thank you, Jim. Can you guys see me? Great. Well, hey, thank you for presenting. And let me just say, I agree with all of what Jim said. I don't say that very often, but I really, really, your philosophy as a group, the way you're investing, the scale of the investment, the things you had on that chart, the states going down to the state house level, even the comment someone made earlier that we feel like we're living on thin ice. It's because we've been doing things the wrong way broadly. Well, you're doing it the right way. So I just want to start by saying I'm such a fan of what you're doing and how you're doing it, and I'm so impressed by the scale of it. So thank you for just doing what you're doing. And I love that you're helping Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, all these other states. I'd like that Ohio's on the list as well, but either way, your approach is exactly what we need. So I'm going to talk for 2 seconds. I think I got about 10 minutes, then we'll go to Q&A. So I'm going to do sort of a shorter version of what I often talk about. But if I could, let me see, find my screen here. Where is this? Just to sort of give the reason why I think what you're doing is so important. And this slide somewhat says why that. And I'm like Simon, I think we can do great things this year. So what I present can often sound more pessimistic, but I do it because I think we need to see very clearly what the other side has been doing for a long time and why what we have been trying to do until recently that hasn't looked like what Jim just rolled out and laid out, what we've been doing has not been effective in battling what they've been doing. And I often ask people, does it feel like we were celebrating victories in 2008 and 2020 as if we had won the entire victory for democracy, but only months or years later we realized we hadn't been winning? And I think people can sort of, if we're honest with each other, think, yeah, we actually did do that. We celebrated the Obamas winning as if that we had won everything. 2 years later, it was clear that we hadn't. We celebrated Biden beating Trump in 2020 and winning the Georgia Senate race as if we had won the entire battle. Only months later, it was clear that we hadn't. Forget even January 6th. If you feel like you're winning your battle, but then only a few months later you can kind of see that you weren't, you've got to do a deep look into what you're doing. And you better look deeply what the other side's doing, because if you thought you were winning, you weren't. They're not doing what you were thinking they were. And I try and walk through this in the books I've written, my presentations. So on our side on the left, for a long time until recently, we've generally taken democracy for granted, I think it's fair to say. We've also been confident, and this is correct, that, hey, the things we stand for are generally popular. They're generally mainstream. So in assuming that democracy is intact, which we've assumed, and in assuming that most of what we stand for, that we stand with the majority, which is true, if any poll will tell you that on almost every issue that the Democrats espouse, we're with the majority. You put those two together, and our basic election strategy has been, our political strategy, hey, let's go out and win elections saying what we're for. And we largely have done that for federal elections, thinking that's how we'll accomplish our biggest goals. That's the easiest, most efficient way. And that means we very quickly focus on a few swing states for federal elections in even years. And when we win those federal elections in even years in those handful of swing states, we celebrate like we've won our entire battle, don't we? And that celebration, I think in hindsight, has turned out to be premature, because the other side's battle, and that's the side on the right here, is actually very different. Their battle does not assume democracy is intact, because it's not, and they know that. Their battle takes pages from playbooks like Viktor Orban's, or even the Jim Crow South a century plus ago. They know that democracy can be undermined. And they know where it's undermined. They know which institutions can undermine it. The other thing the other side knows is they know that their worldview is largely very unpopular, in many ways toxic. Jim mentioned Dobbs. Mitch McConnell knew when Dobbs went down, he was in for a tough year. He told Lindsey Graham, don't you dare bring an abortion ban to the Senate, because he didn't want to lose. That's true on all their issues. They know that almost all their major issues are unpopular. So since they know that democracy can be undermined and that their issues would lose the elections on a fair playing field, they don't choose the battle we choose, which is to go out and fight for Senate wins in swing states, as if that's the end all be all of their battle. Their battle is over democracy itself. How do you subvert it enough to lock in minority worldviews that otherwise wouldn't win? That's their battle. Look at issue 1 last August in Ohio. That was the encapsulation of their battle. They wanted to win elections in Ohio, referenda, by getting to 41%, because they know that most issues, they're underwater. Here's the problem, though. For them, if that's their battle, simply trying to win a bunch of Senate seats in swing states actually would be a losing battle. Over time, they wouldn't win that battle. What is the institution? And this is why what you put on your chart, Jim, was so important. What is the single most institution for them to win their battle? It's the state houses of America. The state houses are the perfect institution. If your goal is to subvert democracy enough to lock in minority worldviews that otherwise lose, you go to state houses. And why is that? I'll be real quick on this. One, that I call them the Achilles heel of American governance, in the wrong hands. Laboratories of autocracy in the wrong hands. Why? Because they control every issue that we care about, but that they care about and that are part of their agenda. State houses, because they write the election laws, can be used to suppress the vote of the majority. If your goal is to subvert democracy to get a minority view to win, being able to suppress the vote of the majority coalition is a great power to have, isn't it? They also draw the district lines in most cases in these states. And with that power comes the power to gerrymander your state so that you have false representation. You have false majorities or supermajorities that do not reflect the people of these states, like Wisconsin's been saddled with for a long time. You also have the ability in many states to draw districts that you largely never worry about. You can draw them so one-sided, like they've done in Ohio, where 50 out of their 62 districts have had a margin of victory of 20% or more for a decade. And it gets even worse in some of these states, and a lot of them, by the way. They've drawn districts that are so extreme that Democrats ultimately decided to stop running. So in many of these states, they are running their agenda through, they're suppressing the vote of the other side. And in many states, including, and this is all 2022, Georgia, even swing states, Pennsylvania, others, 50% or more aren't even contested. 50% of the people who kicked the 2 Justins out in Tennessee, uncontested the year before. Of course they're going to act like they act. They don't even have opposition in the general election, often not even the primary. So to go back to this overall slide, what I've described for you on the right, the perfect place for them to do what they need to do is to control state houses. And that's why, as we've been focused largely until very recently on federal elections, swing states, largely the celebrity-style Senate races that, as Jim showed, get all sorts of money, we have been underfunding and underfocused on where they have dominated us, which is state houses. And so we're happy to win federal, and they run their entire agenda for the most part through state houses. They can have Mike Johnson basically do nothing with the exception of this weekend, which was good news, but they don't care if nothing happens in Congress. Almost their entire agenda on every issue they care about goes through the state houses that they dominate. And until recently, until groups like yours have come along and others that you're supporting, we have largely not even tried to interrupt their sort of path to success. And so in closing, before we get to questions, the good news is, one, people are starting to figure this out. We are seeing in the last couple of years, thanks to your work and others, more money going to the state level. Jim mentioned it. We also see, by the way, Trump taking over the party. Hopefully, he's pulling money out of what used to be very smart investment in their part at the state level domination I've talked about. But the other thing that's good about it, so one, we're seeing a beginning of a winning streak in these places because we're starting to pay attention. But the other thing I go through in great detail in my second book is once you see the problem, the solution becomes very clear, and you're doing it all. That's why I love what you're doing. Once you see that they are right, that we are in a battle for democracy itself, to me, the the consequences of seeing that, all of a sudden it's very clear what we've been doing wrong. And I think it's quite clear what we need to do better and different, which is what you're doing. I love that you talked about the long game. This can no longer ever again be about just 2-year cycles. We get all excited with a few months to go. We really only focus on the elections and candidates themselves. We don't do enough of the other work. And then after November, we shut it all down and go on vacation for a year and a half. In a long battle for democracy, that is an absolute losing strategy. We should always be building. Yes, some of the work is with elections, but a whole lot of the work is with the kind of grassroots infrastructure you're doing. Finding those infrequent voters and getting them back in the game. Helping the groups that you're helping register now. How much more meaningful it is if someone in your community registers you now versus running around with a week to go, desperately saying, please register. There's a meaningful nature to the interactions that you're supporting that you lose if it's last minute, or a last minute showing up at someone's door with 3 days to go versus a longer term build of that relationship. So once you see the long game, I think there's so much more you can do, and there's so much more you can sort of plan and take stock in progress outside of whether or not you were red or blue for a particular cycle. I won't go through all the details here. I want to get to questions, but once you see that we're in a battle for democracy itself and that their front line are state houses, that's where they're beating us. It also means we have to start battling in more states than we battled in. Even if there isn't a Senate race, I agree with Jim completely. When you have trifecta opportunities and state house opportunities like Arizona this year, like Pennsylvania this year, yes, go for it. Because you can win at all those levels, and we have to. But we also have to start seeing that not competing in other places has allowed the extremism to explode. States that Obama won, like Iowa and Indiana, North Carolina, we stopped competing because we only saw the value as, could we get a federal office out of that? Well, now we've allowed extremists to take these places over. We're not even there having conversation. Of course they're winning. We've got to compete in all 50 states. We've got to start to go beyond just the swing districts of states, but especially, this is why I love your focus, especially go after state houses. Let's flip Arizona. You want to see what a successful 2024 looks like? Yes, we have to beat Trump, of course. Yes, we've got to do the other trifecta pieces, but let's flip the Arizona State House. Let's flip the New Hampshire State House. Let's hold on to the new Michigan and Pennsylvania majorities that we had huge success in winning in 22. Long game for democracy, it's all those levels that start to get you the kind of the momentum for democracy that we haven't built by only focus on federal. A couple other quick things. This is so much bigger than Donald Trump. This started before he ever ran. This started after Obama won. And they started doing some of their worst attacks in 11. And let's be honest, if he were locked up tomorrow, whether it's the New York trial, another trial, almost everything they are doing to attack democracy in states would continue unabated. That's what they do in these places. So we have to see the battle as more than just Trump. We can't only equate it with beating Trump. We beat Trump in 20, didn't we? If all it took to save democracy was beating Trump, we already did that. Democracy isn't saved. That's because it's a much deeper battle in all these states than we used to see. And the last thing is, I hope, and this is what you guys do, which is sort of preaching choir here, once you see we're in a battle for democracy itself and that the front line is everywhere, and not only a few swing states that happen to have Senate races, you actually see there's so much more we can all do. And like the dollars that you are raising and giving, in many cases, the value added of what you are doing in many of these frontline races is far bigger than a rounding error on a TV buy for a U.S. Senate campaign. And that's why the work you do, when I see 5- and 6-figure amounts that you're raising to these different state level efforts, having been a chair of the state party, I can tell you those, in some of the places you're putting that's so much money. That's a budget changing amount that you are putting into these places. And so once you see that it's a state level battle, I think you can see there's so much more of a difference that we all can make than we often believe if we think it's only about a few federal races. So I'll stop talking with that. Obviously, I've got a lot to say, but I'll take the rest out through your Q&A. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate listening to me.
Thank you, David. That was...
And I can share the PowerPoint, David Rosenberg. I'm happy to do that.
You took the words right out of my mouth. Thanks so much, David. I am Aaron Hamburger. I'm the membership person over here at 31st Street Swing Left and also the question curator.
Right.
So if you have questions for David, please put them in the chat. So far, there's been a lot of like wonderful commentary and like, yes, yes, that sounds right. I do have a couple questions that came over to me through direct messages. So one question I have actually is my own question, which is this. We often hear this analysis. I agree with so much of what you said. I think it's like right on. A lot of times, like there's this idea like, oh, if only they knew what we were for, they would vote for us. But I do think that some of the reason that people vote for Republicans is because it sounds like they're talking their language, like their style, or they will key into like some measure of discontent that they feel about issue A, B, or C, and then like they'll kind of run with it. To what extent do you think perhaps part of the reason that Republicans are succeeding, it's not just like, actually, if they found out what we were for, they might still not vote for us because they actually just kind of like the way that like Trump sounds or the way that these candidates, they seem to be speaking their language or speaking to them.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. When I wrote my second book, I originally did not have a chapter planned on messaging, but I really think we always have to talk about it. So I wrote one. What's funny is I think that, again, if you take a look at most polling and our issues, almost everything we stand for is actually popular or mainstream or very popular, and in many cases taken for granted. Like, we've been for Roe v. Wade all this time, so have most Americans. They just didn't think it would go away, so it wasn't one of their top issues. So I think a couple things come from that. One, yeah, we should always work on how can we best message what we are for, perhaps more effective than we do. But because the other side knows that most of their views are unpopular, their message battle isn't about how to talk about what they're for. Well, it's disinformation. It's changing the subject. It's nonstop attacks on us. And pardon my French, it's scaring the hell out of their own voters to show up in artificially bigger numbers than they really are. We know that's why Donald Trump didn't want Johnson to solve the immigration problem. So the lesson I would take from some of that is, yes, what we are for is generally mainstream. And in some ways, that makes us almost less intense about how we need to message well to win. I would say, one, focus well on that. Two, since they're the extremists, make sure we point that out. And after Dobbs, Gretchen Whitmer did that well. Carrie Lake was exposed as an extremist. Mastriano was too extreme. Mehmet Oz said in debate he thinks abortion should come down to a woman, her doctor, and the local elected official. Those races were all over. So if they're being extremists, point out their extremism and the logical extension of their extremism. That's number two. Number three, and this is a longer conversation we have time for today, but I want to walk through it. In red states, these state houses are basically corrupt. They're no longer about public service. They essentially are taking public goods and turning them over to private players. It's like Brett Favre giving money to volleyball courts, right? On steroids everywhere. And they're giving away the public school money to for-profit schools like in Ohio, on and on. The other thing I would focus on in those states is with that corruption comes inevitably declining public outcomes that are indefensible. 4 days of school a week in some places, the roads falling apart in Michigan. I think focusing on everyday results that are collapsing, that everyday voters don't even think about as partisan, is a really, really good strategy. That's why Whitmer won so well in her first race. That's why Laura Kelly is the Democratic governor of Kansas. All she talked about was the decline of public schools under Sam Brownback and how to fix them. The last thing I'd say to think about their playbook that we sometimes screw up. They push the immigration issue to get their voters out. They don't care if it convinces mid-swing voters. It's for their turnout. And we have to be smart enough to realize what are the issues that we talk about to turn out our voters. Sometimes we're so quick to go to a milquetoast moderate message, we're giving out messages that our own voters aren't going to be inspired by. And so I think we have to be thinking about what are some of our messages that serve the turnout purpose. Or Jim, I know you wrote that long article that might get some of those infrequent voters who've decided that voting doesn't change their life. You got to hit them with a message that, no, we will change your life by doing something. And it may feel a little bit more leaning into the progressive agenda than often Democrats do, but you know what? Good. We will not win if we don't get our votes out. And sometimes we're our own worst, ally there. We put out messages that simply don't inspire ourselves. So that's a lot on message, but I think there's a combination of things we can do better.
Okay, great. We've got a flood of questions in the chat, which is so great. And it sounds like you actually sort of answered one of the questions, which is like, what is the key to success, especially regarding issues to flipping state houses? Can you just name like 3 to 4 states with state houses that you think are in play and are important to target, and maybe like an effective way to flip those state houses beyond just like the messaging? But
yeah, I mean, the first one is obviously especially with that Supreme Court decision a couple weeks ago. Arizona is the perfect quadrifecta, if that's a term. I think it is. You've got the presidency's going through Arizona. I agree with Jim. You've got the U.S. Senate. You've got the state houses 1 seat away. If we flip 2, we win the majority. I think the same is true on the Senate, on the state Senate. And now we have a Supreme Court where 2 of them voted to have everything go back to 1864. I think they're both up. I think 2 of them are up. That's one where there will be other issues to talk about, but I think that decision, and if you look at the result of the governor's race, tells you where to go with it. I think that really places their extremism right at the center of that race. So that's a biggie. We also, I think, are 1 seat shy of the New Hampshire State House. That's another one that can also, you have other races in the state. But then the other thing we cannot do, we can't slide back. The other big one, Jim mentioned it, Wisconsin. With the undoing of gerrymandering, we not only can win we not only have to win the Senate race and the presidential race. The map, I think, is not easy, but we can make a ton of gains in the Wisconsin legislature. There's been no state worsely gerrymandered for a decade with horrible results than Wisconsin. So if we can make in one election a massive push to gain state house seats in Wisconsin while winning those other 2, again, in the long-term battle for democracy, that state house, negating that horrible Wisconsin state house is a big, big deal. But then I would say, and again, you've got Michigan, you got Pennsylvania. We just won those. We have them by a sliver. We've got to maintain or grow. Another state I'm fond of, I'm not mentioning my own, obviously I'm an Ohio guy, but North Carolina had that terrible situation where they won a race to keep out of the superminority, right? And then that one legislator flipped. So I think there's an opportunity to end the Republican supermajority. They've been through hell in North Carolina with gerrymandering and the one independent state legislative case. We can help them by eliminating a supermajority that will do terrible things if it's allowed to keep going. Those are just some of them. And they're different messaging points for each. Some will be the other side's extremism. In Michigan, a lot of it will be, and this is the good news, once Democrats won Michigan in 22, they've been doing some great things that reflect the majority of the state of Michigan. So I think in those states, it could simply be building on what have been some big progressive wins since they took over the 3 branches of government.
Great. Okay. Those are great answers. So a couple of questions I just want to combine together. By the way, I want to highlight there's a lot of questions. We don't have time to get to everything, but we do stay on after the formal program closes to chat some more. So if your question isn't answered, then please hang on to it until later. But my question is this: how do we talk to young voters to get them excited? They haven't quite been so excited as we'd hope. And then also, how do we address voters, particularly young voters who are disaffected because of Gaza? What kind of messaging do you recommend on that?
Okay, this is going to be my
something I want to know as somebody, I'm a university professor and I'm in contact with a lot of these young folks.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to put up some shit. So for those of you who are interested in what I'm talking about, if we don't have time to answer a question, I do a Substack almost every day now beyond my books. I'm going to put a link to one of them here because it also answers the question. But if you're interested in this stuff, follow me. I almost never have a paywall, so you could just sign up and get the stuff. I put up something about a month ago that at least really made me think hard about that question. And I think, and you'll go to the link when we're done, you can see this. I had a gentleman in Florida who I happened to be staying with when I spoke down there, and he said to me, "Hey, David, I'm going to send you my list overnight." And I said, "Well, list of what?" And he said, the list of the freedoms that we will all lose if Trump wins the election. And I run around every day with this list and I give it to people and I said, which of these freedoms are you willing to lose by voting for Trump? And he sent me this very long list, and it was a good list. And I actually pared it down to lead to what I've linked to there. And, you know, you guys can put together the list in your own minds. If you look at what Trump has said, what Trump did, and the Project 2025, it's pretty clear how many freedoms we're going to lose. Women's right to choose, freedom to protest, freedom of religion, the media, all none. And what it really led me to think about is, for some voters, the best way to frame this race isn't Trump versus Biden. It's Trump versus them and their freedoms. Or if you're talking to them, this race is about Trump versus you and your freedom. And that's when you give them a list and say, if Trump wins, which of these freedoms are you going to give up? Because they're going to be gone. They're going to be on the chopping block. And I think especially for voters who think that Biden's too old, or they don't like what he's done in Gaza, or they just aren't connecting with him, maybe he's too moderate. You say, of course it's about Trump versus Biden, but once you listen seriously to what Trump is saying, Trump is a direct attack on your freedom. Now, you may not love Biden, but if he wins, he'll stand in the way of that. And so make it about their freedoms and what they will lose if he wins. And Dobbs says one reason we have a winning streak for democracy is Dobbs made the loss of that freedom very real for people. It's what it actually looks like. That story the other day about women dying because people are so passive. You all probably saw that story. After Dobbs, doctors don't want to even deal with pregnant women in some cases, making these very, very real to people like Dobbs did. These are the freedoms you would lose. That's what's at stake. Even if you don't love Biden, Trump wins, we get that. I think that's a very strong framing, especially for the people who aren't all that into Biden. The one other thing I'd say, and this is why it's so important to do what you're all doing. And so, yeah, the link what I recommend to a group like this is every one of you make your top 10 list of freedoms you would lose, share them amongst the group, and then collate into one really powerful one. And then we all talk that way. But the other reason why it's so great that you're helping state house candidates is that's the other antidote. In Michigan or Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, young voters may not show up because they love Biden or not, but they may show up for that 27-year-old dynamic state house candidate who's going to protect choice in Michigan. They may be the better get out the vote candidate, and that's the other reason why what you're doing is so important. This is especially a year where I think there will be a bottoms-up effect on turnout if we support all these candidates running.
Well, that is one of the best answers I've ever heard to that question. We've been asking it a lot, and I think we're going to take notes on that. Let's all say a big thank you to David for presenting to us. As I mentioned earlier, we'll be staying on after the formal close of this meeting to chat some more about some of the questions we didn't get to here. But now I want to turn it over to Mary, and then Lisa is going to introduce Linda, who's going to also speak to us. So thanks again, David.
Thank you. Take care.
Thank you. Mary, go for it.
David Pepper, you are absolutely awesome. Thank you.
Thanks, Mary. I appreciate it.
So my name's Mary Pence. I want to inspire you with something, and then I want to ask you to do something. So, we all know what happened yesterday. The House passed essential funding bills for our allies. And in the new member meeting, Ruth Eisenberg said she was going to do everything she could to elect Biden. And I want to give you a subtle analysis of why I believe that 10, 20 years from now, Biden will be viewed as one of the best presidents of the United States. But this is what David Hubble wrote. He says, slowly, methodically, and carefully, President Biden has helped a wounded and weakened speaker get to the point of bringing Biden's international aid bills to the floor over objections from the speaker's own party. Few presidents have demonstrated the legislative skill and deal-making skill Biden has exhibited over the last 3 years. Amid the chaos and din, Biden has been in the background, working quietly to promote the interests of the American people and its allies. It takes a special person to be willing to suffer insults in public while achieving success in private. That fact alone speaks volumes about Joe Biden's character and discipline. So turning then to our fundraiser on May 15th, which Jim has talked about, I am now going to make my ask. And my ask is that you consider co-hosting this fundraiser on the 15th. You know that's our power. Every single one of us has a network. College roommates, kids, the parents of kids that our kids have played with in the past, book groups, places of worship, on and on and on. And when we together bring our networks to put out the word about what it takes, what we need to be doing to save our democracy, we are invincible. I really believe that. I have a goal of having 30 co-hosts for this event on May 15th, and my request is, would you be one of those co-hosts? We do all the work. We give you the invitation. All you have to do is individually send out at least 10 invitations. So if you can think of 10 people in your network, of course, more is better. I'd rather have 20 than 10, but I'll settle for 10. If you can think of 10 people in your network that you believe share your passion for saving our freedoms, as David Pepper just outlined it, then you have what it takes to be a co-host. So if you'd be willing to be a co-host, please email me. It's very easy. It's marypence58@gmail, and I'll put it in the chat as soon as I finish talking because I can't talk and type at the same time. Please search your heart. Say, yes, I am willing to be a co-host, and send me an email. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. So the other person that is seeking volunteers is Linda Schuett. Linda Schuett is one of our long-term members. And one of the things I appreciate most about Linda is she definitely jumps in when we need help, but she also initiates efforts herself. If she thinks of something that would be really helpful to do out in some community, she organizes people to go do it. And she has a request today. So Linda?
Well, first of all, Mary Pence, I'm going to say in public that I will be a host. Okay. And Lisa, thank you. It's great to be here today, and it's great to see all of you. And I'm only going to speak for a minute or maybe a minute and a half. I want you to know that we've started a small group of people to plan and discuss how we can best engage the Hispanic community in the next election. All of us in the group, and we're a small group, but all of us in the group have some ability to speak Spanish. We have a draft script that provides the questions we need to ask in Spanish about registration to vote and voting. So this script has the questions we would ask of the Hispanic person and the translation to that into English. So that theoretically, if you don't know that much Spanish, but you can say things in Spanish enough to be understood, then you could theoretically use just the script to get the information out that we want to get out. That is not ideal, but it's better than not. The script we think will be helpful in various ways. Like one example is how many people who speak Spanish, not fluently, but okay, how many people know how to say register to vote in Spanish? I didn't know that. I know it now, but it's on that piece of paper. Our goal here is perhaps a lofty one. We would like to see that we have a Spanish-speaking person that with every person who is canvassing in Pennsylvania, every time. That may or may not be, we may or may not be able to reach that goal, but we hope to. We are also looking at ways of accomplishing this goal in perhaps a different way. If the Spanish speaker can be available by phone for a specific amount of time during the canvassing, then if we end up with talking to a Hispanic person who doesn't speak English, the person can get on the phone and talk to the person. I think it's important that we show them that we care about talking to them and understanding them. So the bottom line is we need more people to do this. And so if any of you have just some ability to speak Spanish, please join us. If you speak Spanish fluently, please join us. If you have friends who speak Spanish, ask them to join us. We will welcome you with open arms. So I put my, and I used alt cap so you could find it eventually, hopefully, my email address in the chat. And please, if you have anything, anytime that you want to talk to me, just send me an email. We can talk to each other by phone. And I hope we'll get people to join us. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Linda. Very much appreciate that.
And Linda, can you put your email address in the chat one more time? Because sometimes they get lost. So
That's what I'm afraid of. That's why I waited till the last minute. But I did put it in all caps. You see it up there? I'll put it in again. Oh, okay, I'll do it again. Yes, I will.
Okay. Jim, am I forgetting anything? Or is that our program?
I think they said, I am going to take the liberty of putting that donation link one more time in the chat. But I see David is still here, so we got some more questions. That'd be great.
Yes. So this is the close of our formal program, but David has been very kind to say he'll stay on for a few more minutes because we had a lot of different questions, and Aaron will continue to curate. And we just really appreciate your coming out today. It's been really a terrific meeting. Very much appreciate, David, your guidance and your information. So Aaron, do you want to go back to pulling out some questions?
sure, absolutely. And David, thanks for staying on.
course.
Another question that I had was, you mentioned you agree to some degree with Simon Rosenberg's optimism. Can you tell us what your straight scoop is? How optimistic versus worried are you at this moment?
So my overall view is the better default is to be worried. I don't. So when I say I'm optimistic, it's based on some things, but my attitude, and this will maybe be a slightly different from Simon, is when I see a poll that I don't like, I'm not immediately trying to dismiss it. Actually, if it makes us realize that Trump could win, Wisconsin, great. Let's have that motivate us to work harder. So I'm not just optimistic because I want to be. And in fact, being sober about the risks and that it could happen is probably the healthier mindset. But why am I optimistic right now? It's not because of all the national stuff. It's not because of any polling, even though I do agree with some of Jim's assessments of of some of the things that are happening. Well, the main reason is because when I wrote these books of mine, I wrote them sort of hoping that things I was saying were the case. And if we focused at the more local level, if we focused on state house races, if we put some of our resources and our energy there, it would work. And the wonderful news is since August of 22, it has. You saw the Kansas referendum in 22 on reproductive freedom, 60-40. You saw state houses flip in November of 22 that hadn't flipped in 60 years when you had the White House, but Michigan flipped and Pennsylvania flipped. The Minnesota Senate flipped. Election deniers lost all over America in swing states. Mastriano Lake lost again. That was a midterm where we're supposed to lose everything, and it went the opposite. And then we saw the Wisconsin Supreme Court race in April of 23, Ohio in August, Ohio in November. We flipped Virginia in November of 23. We saw 70% of Moms for Liberty candidates lose in 23. Sawazi replaces Santos early this year. The point is, there is a trend that isn't being captured by the polls that reflects some pro-democracy energy that just keeps showing up and reflects the fact that, as I said at the very beginning, they are too extreme for America. And so my optimism comes from that trend. And if we're smart enough to take advantage of the things that have created that trend and not go back to only worrying about a few federal elections, but see that we can win if we focus on all these levels, then I'm optimistic. If we build on it, if we have the muscle memory to keep it going, like that presentation where Jim had not just presidential, he had trifecta state houses. That's what's led to the winning streak. And if we learn from it and we don't if we don't turn to federal only activists again, I think we can build on it. That's the heart of why I feel good that we could have a really good year if we continue to focus on all these levels and don't fall back to thinking victory is only about winning a few federal races we obviously care about.
And then in terms of making that happen, so are you saying the way to make that happen, like for us as members of this group, would be donating to those races and state Democratic parties, canvassing for those candidates? Anything else that you think we should be on?
I mean, I love that you're doing registration. You'll see in my saving, someone had read it. I have a whole chapter about we have to use every part of our footprint. In these states where purging has been so bad, Ohio, Georgia, or we know that we just haven't had enough registered voters on our side, or infrequent voters who may be registered but aren't showing up because they don't think it's going to matter to them. That's another one. That's a 24/7, 365 every single year assignment. So I love that you're doing that. That's another one where, to the extent you're giving that kind of work, that it's happening in April and not only, a weeks before the deadline. Really, really important. Another thing, this is not, I think, your core mission, but longer term, big long game is all of us figuring out wherever we live, how can we make sure we're running in more places? Because they don't, in too many parts of America, where most of their extremist agenda is happening, for the most part, they feel zero accountability ever in their careers. And so this isn't your near-term assignment, but long. And one of the good things that's happened in the last year is we see more and more state parties. North Carolina, Michigan ran in every district in 22, worked out well. We're starting to see more and more people realize we're not going to win every year. Of course not. But we bring accountability back to places that have kind of careened to an extremism when we start to challenge them in more places. And so that's another big one. But a lot of it you're doing, which is to make sure we're disciplined enough to, you showed it. We're not going to lose the Senate races because we're being outspent. We're going to outspend them. That chart, it makes it perfectly clear. We've been outspent, out-resourced at the next level down, actually 2 down. State House, state infrastructure, state Supreme Court, and all that. So your work to even that out is really, really important as well.
Great. So a number of people have been sort of applauding your book, and recommending that everybody go and read it. I think you can definitely, if you want to find out what David is saying, please go to Amazon or wherever. Hopefully, an indie bookstore. I'm a big believer.
I'll put up a link to my website where there are different options.
Great. One of your messages. Okay, actually, this is on a separate track. I'm seeing a couple of questions about this. It seems like there's candidates that are amassing big amounts of money, and then there's other candidates or causes that are in more need. And the question is, do you think those candidates sitting on those big pots of cash would share them or would be prevailed upon to share that cash with the other candidates?
I mean, generally, I doubt it. And that's where you come in.
Mm-hmm.
I have a little, well, let me go back to my presentation real quick because I have a slide on this. So I don't fault a candidate for raising a lot of money. I do think they should try and share it more. Let me if I can find this. But we need to be smarter as a collective of donors. And this is what you're doing. People know how to give to the 5 or 6 Senate candidates who they want to give to. That person's sort of a celebrity. Like, let's go through on the left side here is Amy McGrath's pie chart. $100 million. We know who she is. We know that she's running against Mitch McConnell, who we don't like, and we know how to give to her. It's on her website. We go, we give. It's very easy. It's very high profile. And what we together need to do, and again, the point is, when we get fired up, we have a lot more money than they do. There is a massive power in our grassroots giving. But we as a collective need to be more strategic about where we put our money. And the point of this charge is to say, if you take, and this is what you guys are doing, this is what the States Project is doing, this is what Sister District is doing. If we take just a sliver of that Amy McGrath $100 million, again, not faulting her, she's supposed to raise money, but if the rest of us said, you know, if we took 10% of her money and moved it into dozens of state house races, we would fully fund them all over these states, and we'd be bringing accountability. Maybe we'd flip Michigan, or maybe we'd flip Wisconsin. So it's kind of on all of us to do this. But the biggest challenge is it's harder because people don't know who these people are, and they don't know how to give to them, and they don't know how to vet them. And that's why what you're doing, taking grassroots donors and saying, oh, give to Sherrod Brown, of course, we want you to, or Bob Casey, but take some of your money, park some of it into some smart strategic places at the state level. It will go further. That's what we all have to start doing, and you're doing it through what you do. I've created some ways to do it. The States Project is a best practice. So there are a lot of different ways to do it, and we just have to keep pounding that, because I think this will lead to the better result long-term, more than hoping that certain federal candidates start giving away their money to other candidates. That generally won't happen.
Yeah, I hope
But
everybody
we have
listening
to
right
together.
now. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, here's what I would say, though.
Yeah.
I think the time is now for Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, Jamie Harrison, by the way, who's a friend of mine, understands all this. But Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, Chuck Schumer, Nancy Pelosi, current Hakeem Jeffries, they need to start seeing. They don't need to give away the money they've raised, but I think they should start lifting up this broader vision and organizations that are worthy of support as much as you or I do. Because again, long-term, we're not going to win if we only win those federal races. And I think they need to see that vision. And if Kamala Harris were to, and I think she understands this, I've talked to her about it once, if she were to go out and say what you guys are saying, or States Project, hey, we want you to give to us, but here's a link for how you can really lift up the infrastructure of Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Arizona, which will help us, but also those state house candidates, that would obviously be a massive scale of improvement. And so I think less than giving their money, I think them also sounding like we do and saying, give some of your dollars to those other efforts, long-term isn't just important. I think it has to happen.
Great. Now we only have time for one more question, and
Okay.
thanks for sharing your email. I just put it again in the chat. If you're, I'm sorry, I wish I could get to everybody's questions. I'm getting so many from direct messages and in the chat, so I'm not trying to ignore anyone, I promise. But I'm just trying to curate what I can. How do you feel about postcard writing and letter writing? Do you think, how efficacious is that in terms of like the list of things that you
I think it probably depends. I mean, there are a lot of people, it's the thing they're going to do, and they're not going to knock on doors or make calls. I'm not going to ever discourage that. In some races, I think it can make a big difference. Opinions vary on this. If you talk to a young 25-year-old field staffer, they're going to say, no, they must knock on doors. They must make phone calls. And I get why. Those things are proven to turn out votes. But think about it this way. If in July of last year, when Republicans didn't want anyone to know about the special election to crush Ohio's direct democracy, you got a postcard from anywhere, California or New York, saying your democracy is being attacked by your state house. If this thing called Issue 1 passes, you lose one party, one vote. Don't forget to vote. That postcard actually could have made a big difference. Or if you get your second or third, and the fact that it's from another state actually is like, my gosh, someone elsewhere knows about something I didn't even see yet. So I think in some elections, I've seen this in Ohio, the postcards, Republicans in Ohio assumed that the turnout for the special election August was going to be 8%. That's how they thought they were going to win. It was almost 40%. It was like a midterm. And I think all the noise from phone calls and texts, but also tons of postcards that people did write, I think all of that created almost an echo chamber that something big was going on. People from Oregon were telling you about it, just like your aunt in Indiana knew about it. That really helped. It also could help, and I think it helped us a couple years ago, the postcard did, on our Supreme Court races. We had a couple really active postcard groups adopt a state Supreme Court race. We won a race in 20 to flip our court. We won a race in 20 by 10 points when Trump won by 8. And I think that sort of less on the radar effort helped with people to pay more attention than they otherwise would have. So I think it can help in the right races. I think it has here. If you told me there were 50 volunteers at a headquarters in September, I'd say any one of you can go knock on doors, please, too. Let's be clear. But the postcards from afar, from blue areas that want to help in red areas, in our state, I've seen them make a real difference as well.
Okay, well, thanks. Great to get your perspective. With that, we do have to conclude, but as I said, David's email is right there in the chat. If you have more questions that didn't get answered, please contact him. You can always contact us at 31st Street with your questions, thoughts, and ideas. Thank you, everybody, for being here today. Happy Passover. If you are about to celebrate, I'm going to go make some chicken soup with matzo balls in a minute. Thanks again. Be well, everybody.